Welcome to Superlative. I am your podcast host, Ariel Adams. In each episode, you will meet someone who has inspired or takes inspiration from today's wristwatch industry. Every week, let's dive deep into the world of crafting exotic timepieces, from the people who dream them up to the people who dream of them. It's time to get started and meet today's guest. Hey everyone, Ariel Adams here with the Superlative Podcast. My guest today is Marc Frankel, and he is the founder of Long Island Watch. Marc, welcome.
Hey, thank you, Ariel. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
I've been wanting to have you on the show for a long time, and then we sort of serendipitously ran into one another at, I think it was one of the wind-up events. But remind me, do you have any perception of when we first met? I feel like it was 2008, 2009, something like that.
So I can't put a year to it, but I do know where it was and what it was. It was dinner with Trazer.
Right.
And it was, I'll name drop, it was Barry Klezmer.
Oh, yeah, Barry.
And it was a dinner. A couple of guys were there. I want to say one of the guys from Watchco was there.
Was this in Vegas?
It was in Vegas,
yeah.
I was there, you were there, and, a smattering of other people. And that was, I think you might have been a blog to read still back then.
Yeah.
So, it's been is that 2008? I guess it could be. I mean, I feel like it might be longer than that.
Well, so the website started in 2007, and It was around 2009 that I moved over to a blog to watch.
Okay, so you could be right on the money then too. It seems like longer than 2008, but I guess that's 15 years ago, so that's pretty impressive.
So much has happened in this industry since then, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So let's just sort of give you a little bit of a background. So Long Island Watch, it's a website, longislandwatch.com.
Yes.
And we're going to talk a lot about this, but it's a store. It's an online store to buy a whole variety of brands. Focused, again, I actually don't know how high you go up, but for the longest time, it's been sort of very, reasonably priced. We'll call them, like democratically priced watches. Would you reframe it differently than that?
I call it affordable.
Affordable.
It was just, when I started the business, 20 years ago, that was the term I
But it's a relative term, right? Because some of these people think $5,000 is affordable, and someone else might say you're crazy. So that's why
that's why I like the term affordable, because everyone's definition of affordable is different.
But let's talk about this. Both you and I came from a place of loving watches and trying to find a way to make it our full-time work. What were you doing before Long Island Watch? And spend just a couple of minutes explaining how it started and how it became your full-time career.
Sure, I could probably do the whole podcast on just that topic.
I know it's a big one.
Yeah, it's a big one. So let's see. So I am classically trained in mechanical engineering. I have a bachelor's and a master's of engineering in mechanical engineering. I also have a New York State professional engineering license. That's what I went to school for. I graduated in 98 from the Cooper Union in Manhattan. And the way the story goes was a couple of years into my career, which was around 2000 or so. I was out to lunch. I've always liked watches. I guess I'll preface it with that. I was a watch fan. My dad was a watch person, not like a watch nut like I might be now, but he had a bunch of nice pieces. And I was out to lunch with a bunch of my college buddies, and one of them was wearing an open heart watch, which I knew about watches, but not a ton. I mistaked it for a tourbillon, and he's like, "Oh, I don't know what that is," but he gave it to me. I'm like, "Oh, it's not," and it was really nice. I'm like, "What'd you pay for it?" And it was, I don't know. This is back when the euro first started trading, and it was actually less than $1, and he paid like $80 for it, and I couldn't believe it. I was like, wow, that's really affordable, or really cheap, or whatever you want to call it. And I don't know why I got it in my head that I had just finished reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And I got it in my head that, like, wow, I could probably sell this. I mean, this is something that I could do and enjoy. And just, serendipitously, I contacted the person that he bought it from on eBay. I asked the guy, hey, can I buy 10 watches and sell them here in the States? And he said yes. And he sold me 10 watches at like $70 each. And I sold them on eBay.
That's all it took.
This whole business started from $700. And I sold, I would say maybe 7 or 8 of them out of the 10 for a profit after all said and done.
Here. You wanted to start selling on eBay. Obviously, it's a little bit more complicated. Everyone knows you buy low, you sell high, but what were you doing that company wasn't able to do? Meaning, where did you in that brief space add value?
So they were selling on eBay almost entirely. It was an Elise watch, which actually is still in business.
Yeah, I remember those guys.
Yeah. And it was actually through the guy who owned the Trias brand, which I believe is no longer around. And the value I added was that I was in the States, whereas they were in Germany. So when someone, in this business, it's interesting. If you're an American, you generally don't like to purchase things from overseas and bring them into the States. I say most Americans, once they see, hey, shipping from Germany or shipping from the UK, they're like, I don't want to do that. They worry
about customs and fees.
They worry about all that stuff. But yet the people on the other side, they buy stuff from America all the time.
Really?
So it's kind of crazy. But yeah, the value I added was I was already here. I had already paid the duty on it. I already had it. And they could get it in just a couple of days. And that was it. That was pretty much it.
Did you have an eBay account? Did you start a new one for this?
I had an eBay account under my name for years. The eBay account was since the late 90s.
Right.
And I changed it to Long Island Watch eventually. I don't know what year I changed it to Long Island Watch, but I sold on eBay for close to 2 years or a year and a half. I mean, I stayed on eBay for a while, but then I launched the website in 2003.
So what and again, this is very early on. But
yes.
What did it take at the time? Did you just take pictures of the watch?
Yeah, all it took was a camera. So digital cameras had come out. You got to think back now. This is 2001. Digital cameras. I was married in 2001. I shot my honeymoon on film. And then shortly after we came back is when I got my first Kodak digital camera.
I got my first in 2001. I remember my first.
So that was, I was able to take digital pictures and upload them to eBay and, make a listing, just a plain text listing. And, I knew my in cost and I could figure out shipping and just try to sell it and set a reserve so I wouldn't lose money because I was very risk averse being an engineer and, sell those suckers.
And that's and that started it. And I guess the interesting point is you grew and added on, but in a very reasonable way. I think that you've probably seen from the side a number of companies come into the retail space too hot, too fast. And maybe it's your engineer, but talk a little bit about that longevity.
Yeah, of course. It's very the growth of the website. I mean, I can't say it was purposeful or not, but it was very slow and very organic. There were no big acquisitions ever made. There was never a loan taken out. Never borrowed money. Everything is still my own. All the inventory I own today is still all my own money. Nobody's a partial owner, and as I said before, being an engineer, I'm very I don't like risk. And I had a job. I didn't leave my job until, I guess we'll get into that part of the story, until about a decade later when I could do it. But I still had a position to fall back on, my regular day job as an aerospace engineer. And, not until I would say the mid, 2013, 2014, did I really look back and be like, wow, this thing really grew. But, as you sat there and daily, it was very slow, extremely slow. I remember the days of sitting in a spare bedroom in my house, filling an order every other day. And then, eventually I moved into the basement of that house, and then it grew and grew and grew until where I am now. But yeah, just very slow, and I didn't even realize it. And as you said, or, as my marketing guy said, if I took millions of dollars today and I invest and I tried to build what I have today, I don't think it would ever happen. I think being slow and being ingrained in people's minds on the forums and all these other places I lived for years, I think really is part of the success of the business.
And what was marketing like back at the time? Because I want to compare and contrast a little bit with how it's very different today. But you mentioned the forum. So you had this website, you had some things on eBay. But I guess the big question is, how did you let people know about Long Island Watch and about the specific watches that you were selling?
So I really don't know. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. My website was launched on Front Page for Dummies when I got to the website. It was launched on Front Page. The book I read was Front Page for Dummies. If you don't know what Front Page is, I'm sure you know, but it was Microsoft's web publisher.
Yeah, very basic tool.
Very basic. It was all I did all that myself. Let's see, a couple of years in, I started hearing about this thing called SEO. Didn't know what the hell, I didn't know what it was. And I did pay a firm. What even today, what would actually still be a hefty sum for me today. I paid it, because they said it would bring me all sorts of good stuff. And I stopped that after a year or so because it really didn't do anything. I think I was just throwing money in the toilet. It was just basically they were giving me meta. Yeah, at this point, I know what they were doing. They were giving me meta words to embed in the page.
Yeah.
But I realized back then, so this is 20 years ago. So who were the players online 20 years ago in watches? It was, I think Ashford was around.
Oh, yeah.
Blue Nile, DWS Discount Watch Store. He's no longer around. You had Android, Wing was around, and a couple other stores. But a lot of these stores, whether then online, whether it be Macy's or whoever, they're selling Seiko, they're selling Citizen, they're selling Casio, and I can't compete on that stuff. But I had the Elise and the Trius and the Junkers and the Vostok Europe, and no one else had that stuff. So I learned from an early on that if you have stuff that no one else has, when they search for it, if you can get someone to search for it, you will appear at the top. And that was kind of my modus operandi for years. I couldn't get Seiko. I couldn't get Citizen. I couldn't get these bigger brands simply because they still believed at that point. Well, they've believed up until just a couple of years ago.
You have them now,
that
so
online.
That's the spoiler.
Yeah, of course. But, they believed, I would say, a lot of the bigger brands, spoiler alert, up until, I would say, 2018, 2019, they still didn't believe that online was the way forward because these companies are loaded with dinosaurs. And, they wouldn't give you the time of day unless you had a brick and mortar store. So I stayed with these smaller esoteric brands so that if someone looked for an Elise, I would float up. I would be number one, number two. And that was but that business cadence worked for me. If while running my being at a full-time career, if I had to fulfill and ship 50, 60, 70 orders a night, I wouldn't have been able to do it.
Right.
But I was able to fill a busy day was 2 orders, 3 orders. Like, okay, it takes me a half hour. I could take care of that. But yeah, it's just, it's a very slow growing, but that's how I kind of made myself relevant in a very not crowded space, but just a very difficult space as a small guy.
Well, you had something exclusive, in other words. You had products that if you were going to go on Google and search for them, you knew that you would come up and no one else would. And if it was, especially in the United States, maybe there'd be some foreign seller, but you said earlier, many consumers in the U.S. prefer to buy from within the U.S., so you had that advantage. I guess the logical question after that is, once you started having competition, meaning other stores online in the United States that sold some of the same brands, did your strategy have to change at all?
Not really. What happened in 2000, I think it was 2005, 2006, there was this company online that sold only books. You may have heard of them. They were called Amazon. And they started to experiment with Marketplace. And out of the blue, I'm at Wallbaum's, and I get a phone call on my cell phone from Seattle. I'm like, who the hell's calling me from Seattle? And I pick up, and it was Amazon, and they were looking for beta testers for watches.
Interesting.
They explained it to me, and I'm like, I don't understand. You sell books. They're like, yeah, but we're trying to sell other stuff now. We're trying to get people to come on and sell their wares, and we'll take a percentage of it. And that was my next step. I was with Amazon for a number of years.
Okay.
And that helped me then compete with the bigger guys because they kind of leveled the playing field, for smaller stores, versus larger stores.
And how was that an advantage for you? I mean, just, explain to people being in the Amazon marketplace. Did it expand reach? Was it automatic orders? What did it do for you that allowed you to compete?
So it expands reach 100% because now if Amazon, let's say my store got, I don't know, 30 visitors a day, compared to the 10,000 a day it gets now or 20,000 a day. Amazon got millions a day, and all you had to do was try to funnel the people to your product. But if they're looking for watches, great. And if there's maybe 500 vendors selling watches, then you have a pretty good shot at popping up. And then if you just lower your price enough, you'll win the buy box. And once you win the buy box, that's when the orders start pouring in or coming in. I just say pouring in, coming in. And my store name on Amazon was Long Island Watch, so they would find your store, and then eventually, like everyone else learned, you just go and you search out the store online.
Interesting. And how that was great for a while, and then my presumption is that Amazon started to get increasingly saturated, and it was obviously less effective.
Yeah, after a while, it just I want to say it was never fun. I did stop with them. I don't know. Let's see. It was pre-pandemic, 2018 or so. We had a quote unquote falling out, if you will.
Wow.
There was a point where they
changed a lot.
They changed. There was a point though, they were nearly 40% of my revenue, my yearly revenue. And that freaked the hell out of me.
I can understand that.
Because, you get into launching your own business so you can be your own boss. But if someone else controls 40% of your revenue, guess what? You're not the boss anymore. So I made a purposeful shift in strategy, and I raised all my Amazon prices so stuff stopped selling on there, on purpose.
Wow.
And eventually, I got a string of bad feedbacks, 3 or 4 in a row, and because my order volume was so low, they suspended me. I appealed. I did appeal. They denied my appeal, and then I basically just said, okay, well, that's it. I'm not going to appeal again. I'm done. We're done. And at that point, it didn't matter anyway because Amazon was such a small percentage of what I did. It was okay to leave. Was that
an inevitable change, or do you think that Amazon mismanaged something that was good?
I think that, I don't sell on anywhere anymore except for the website. But as far as other I've been on a lot of marketplaces. I've been on Newegg, I've been on Rakuten, I've been on Amazon US, CA, UK. I was also on another Amazon. I forgot which one. Maybe it was Germany. Anyway, the big thing is Amazon is extremely, extremely, extremely customer centric. The customer can never, ever be wrong. Only in my final years of selling on Amazon did they launch a program. I forgot what the acronym is, but it was one where you could appeal internally and say, hey, this customer used the item for like a week and a half, abused the hell out of it, and sent it back to me. Because that's what people do on Amazon. They get the product, they use it, they don't like it, they send it back, and they say, oh, I never touched it. And you have to give them their money back. So they're very customer centric, whereas I found eBay, even to this day, is very I think they're more vendor centric, and they take care of their vendors. And that's why you hear a lot of Amazon horror stories of accounts just getting locked for, a bad feedback or, my whole Amazon UK debacle that I did a video on, which is totally crazy. They basically held me at ransom saying I owed them like thousands of pounds, and I could never figure out why. And they couldn't tell me why, which was really weird. But just all this BS, I just finally was like, I got to get out. I got to get rid of these people.
So at first, these platforms helped vastly accelerate your business and amplify the number of orders. But at some point, you're saying that it changed. Now, was it because you'd been on those platforms for a while, or were those platforms, in your opinion, no longer good for businesses of your type at all?
Yeah, so I'm honest, and I tell people, I used them for all the good that I could get out of them. I definitely was a pump and dumper. I do have them to thank for, doing more business and getting my name out there. What changed with them? I think just the sheer vastness of their new quote unquote vendor base, the hundreds of thousands of vendors that are on it. They certainly do not have the manpower to troubleshoot, staff, assist. Almost every email you send them is read and replied to by, well, I guess today it would probably AI, but back then it was just machine. It would just pick up certain words and just spit back a reply. I think that's really the problem. And, I look at these, I talk to small business owners often, and when they tell me how much they do on Amazon, I cringe. I go, you gotta get out of that cycle. Yeah, they're great, but just what happens one day when they flip the switch off? What are you going to do? And they look at me like, well, that's not going to happen. And I'm like, how can you say that? Happened to me? A guy who had like a 99.9% feedback rating. I mean, it could happen, anything. I think they just got too big and they just really didn't care anymore. And the other big thing with Amazon, as more and more vendors got on, is something that we call a race to the bottom. Everyone's just competing for the lowest price, the lowest ship price, I should say. So I'm at 150. Let's say Joma Shop's in for 140. I say, I'm going to go to 135. Joma Shop goes to 133. I go to 131. And we're all raising the price to the bottom. Meanwhile, maybe the vendor says, well, you can't, the manufacturer, distributor, wholesaler says you can't sell below X price, minimum advertised pricing. That's a whole nother thing. And then after Amazon takes their ridiculous cut, which nowadays I think is 16 to 17% in the watches category.
Interesting.
And then you pay to ship it, and then you have to pay them for the listing and everything. You could be selling a $200 watch and walking away with $3 in your pocket. That's not my model. That might be other people's models, and I know it is. There are people that live on a few points of margin because they do the volume, but that's not where I live. I live on, much, much better margins than that.
So again, you brought up a lot of important points, and I want to talk more about the sort of race to the bottom in a moment. But I want to talk about these notion of these selling platforms. Amazon's one, eBay's one, Chrono24 is one. There's a number of them, and there's even more growing. So here's my question: you, as a retailer, dealer, whatnot, give them some advice. Give them a statement. You are now speaking to these platforms. Tell them what it is that you're looking for and how not to screw up. Because I hear, I work on both sides of the aisle. I guess also if you include the consumer, and I hear things from your side of it in terms of the price, the percentage they take, not being able to speak to people. So in a couple statements, tell those platforms what they need to do to earn and maintain your business.
Sure. Well, I would say that they need to understand that the lifeblood of the system, they have to make a decision. Is the lifeblood of the system the customer or is it the vendor? Of course, without either, the system collapses. But I feel they are turning away vendors or turning off vendors in a major way. And I don't think that vendors are incentivized enough to maintain on the platform and sell their wares. The fees are fees. I mean, in the watch industry, 17% is, that's kind of hefty. I know in the electronics field, it's even heavier than that. I feel like the value they add for taking that much money is not all that extravagant. And we're not even touching, you could do FBA and then pay storage fees and all the other BS. But I think if they want to win back vendors and keep vendors, they need to make the platform more attractive to vendors and definitely more friendly to vendors.
How can they add value? You're talking about, they take a fee and that's okay if they add value. It used to be that they added sales. You would just be on Amazon, as you said, and sales would come.
That doesn't happen anymore.
Yes. How do you think they should do that, again, from the position of you won't be on these platforms unless you see that value?
Right. So I guess it depends on who the vendor is. I get aggravated because when I was with them, they tried just to get you to spend more money. You should pay for sponsored listings. You should pay for this. You should pay for that. I think actually maybe the biggest disservice that they ever did was allowing everyone and their mother to join the platform.
Well, the funny thing is you became the customer when you're like, wait a minute, I thought I was a vendor supplier. And now you're like,
Right.
wait a minute, the customer is the customer and I'm also the customer?
Right. And I think I believe watches now is an invitation only or a application only process. But it was at a point where it just got inundated with people selling watches. And maybe there's a limit. Maybe you don't need, 15,000 watch vendors or whatever the number is. Maybe you can gate it. Maybe it's 1,000 and that's it. Because I think, once it gets too saturated with vendors, then the race to the bottom starts. And it's impossible for these smaller players to make headway.
So I wrote an article that was published a couple of weeks ago, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago on a blog to watch. And it was about this issue. And I basically frame it as I call it fragmentation in the market of online watch sales. And my basic thesis is that there are far too many places to buy watches online right now. There's really no way for anyone to compete with one another outside of race to the bottom. And that this is a serious problem going along with what I call the last mile issue, which here I basically define as being you can get somebody, to learn about a watch. You can get them excited about a watch. You can get them to desire the watch. But to get them to actually buy it and to funnel them to a comfortable place to do it is actually the problem right now. And so let's talk about your opinions. Again,
Sure.
You are a legacy player in a space that is now so crowded. I just want to frame it for people. It's not just third-party watch stores like Long Island Watch. We're talking fragmentation. Do you buy it from the brand or do you buy it from a third party? Do you buy new? Do you buy used? Do you buy online? Do you buy offline? So talk a little bit about this.
Yeah, so, okay, I definitely have a lot to say about that, and half the thoughts are probably going to fall out of my brain. But you mentioned first that, you can purchase now from a lot of brands have gone direct. What is Breitling direct now, I think, or there's some big guys are direct. But let's take, Orient. Orient went direct to consumer sales. Several years, I was carrying the brand for several years, and they went direct. Now, how does that work? I'm buying it at a wholesale price. They're buying it at a manufacturer's price. They have a lot more margin to play with. Who do they want to sell to? Do they want to sell to me at wholesale or to the customer at retail? Well, they want to sell to the customer at retail. So DTC takes on a whole new, DTC means direct to consumer. DTC takes on a whole new meaning at this point. It's from the manufacturer direct to the consumer. So what's the differentiator then? And this gets back to one of your other questions. How do you make headway? Well, if price is not the only factor, what are the other factors? Well, the other factor is customer service, which is what I've always preached and always tried to do. And then a lot of times there can just be goodwill. For example, on YouTube, I started a series called Watch and Learn. It's over 90 episodes deep, teaching people about watches. So I'm hoping that through those videos that don't really net me any direct profit because I'm not selling a product. I'm just teaching you about stuff that you'll see the video and say, next time I want to buy a Seiko or next time I want to buy an Orient, I'm going to frequent Long Island Watch because they did I hear they have great customer service and the guy taught me a lot of stuff. So I want to give them my business. And as corny as that sounds, it actually works because I definitely get those emails daily from people saying, I'm buying from you over, I want you to know I'm buying from you over, Jeff Bezos, as a lot of people call him in emails. I don't understand. Because of all you taught me and, all the knowledge you've given and all the good words about you on forums. And that's that's the differentiator. If you don't have price to differentiate, if someone's going to go to the lowest bidder, then you can't win no matter what. I had a guy just today, he wanted a watch. It was an expensive watch. And he's like, your competitors are selling it for far cheaper. And I said, well, send me a link. He sends me a link to an eBay listing. So I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, well, that's not a competitor. Someone like me 20 years ago working out of their spare bedroom is not a competitor with overhead, employees, rent, all this other stuff. But if you're the kind of shopper that goes, for the lowest price, that's where you're always going to go. But we have to, as vendors, we have to try to think about what is our differentiator nowadays. For me, it's customer service and, education.
It sounds like the original plan of being the only place to sell something is as relevant as ever, because you're talking about the challenge of competing when the consumer has multiple options to buy a watch. Explaining to them why to buy from you isn't an impossible challenge, because if you develop that relationship, they will stick with you, but is now more challenging than ever before. And you agree that the consumer is in a position of, we'll just call it confusion when it comes to where should I buy my watch.
Right. Google is the great, what's it? I don't want to say the great.
Leveler?
Google is the great, I would say equalizer, but leveler is perfect. It doesn't, we're not brick and mortar anymore. Location, let's say you're an American, you're somewhere in the 50 or even the 48, doesn't matter. And you want to buy a watch. What do? You Google it. It doesn't make a difference if the vendor is in California or Missouri or Oklahoma or Florida or New York. It's all whoever floats to the top, whether you click on sponsored listings or not. Let's say you know the game and you're like, I'm just going to go organic. Whoever floats to the top organically is probably going to be the first person you click on, and ultimately might be the first person you buy. So that obviously becomes a very large, carrot for a lot of vendors, and it's obtaining that, coveted number 1, number 2, number 3 position. As you certainly know, with the way you named your website and stuff, to get people, to when they Google something related to it, for you to pop up.
We're entering an era that I hate to say, I want to call it, is sort of a return to the traditional era when advertising, marketing, essentially getting your message out there, is going to be expensive again. There's going to be, the walled communities that you have to pay to enter. Social media distribution is going to cost money. In essence, many of those techniques that were available, when we started, obviously you started before, are either so oversaturated they don't work.
Yes.
Or no longer available, or the service that provided it now realizes, well, my bread and butter is selling visibility, which is Meta, essentially. They sell visibility. We on Meta, on Instagram, for example, have a certain number of people who have chosen to follow us. It's I don't know, close to 350,000 or something like that on Instagram. But Meta wants us to pay money to reach the people. So I understand they need to make money. It's an expensive platform, but that's fundamentally different than the promise, which was, you're going to be advertised to, but the whole point here is we're going to share your message with the wide people. You're going to be able to have a conversation, and this whole thing is just going to be ad supported. That's no longer the case at all. So that's the status quo. My question for you is sort of an enterprising, smart individual. How do you feel that thing that you got for free now might be something that you have to spend money on, and maybe you never anticipated having to do that?
So, we could talk about marketing strategies. I won't, but we could. My opinion is, if Google or whoever did their job correctly, who should float to the top? The people that genuinely 100% belong there. Not the people playing the game, which 15, 20 years ago was white on white, tag stuffing, and crap like that. It should be the people that are genuinely being talked about on Reddit, on Watch You Seek, on various forums, just social media. People that have high engagement.
You mean things that today AI can easily try to replicate and create fraud?
Yeah. Unfortunately, yes. Unfortunately, that's the thing where, yes.
But that's the problem. That's the problem, everyone.
Of course.
You could have a great theory, but in practice, the fraudsters, the criminals, the hackers, just whoever, it's a game of cat and mouse. You know what I mean? Like,
yes.
This is ideally, I agree with you on all levels, but in practice, you and I both agree from an engineering standpoint, it's hard as hell to do.
Yes, it is. It is. I like to feel that you'd be rewarded for doing the right thing the whole time, but I know that's not the case anymore. And just to your point,
if only Google was a religion.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And to your point on Instagram, or whatever you want to call them, I hate paying them to freaking put my post in front of other people. I mean, come on. It doesn't make any sense. If it's a good post, it should be shown to people. And if it's a bad post, don't show them and let your algorithm do the work. But, unfortunately, that's the beast. As you said, that's It's not what we were promised, but it is what we are getting, and it is the reality. These companies are making money hand over fist, on us, on a platform they developed, for a kick in the pants. Hi, this is Marc from LongIslandWatch.com. Does my voice sound familiar? You might know me from my YouTube videos. I've been selling watches online since 2001 and have grown to become the first place watch enthusiasts visit when they want to make a purchase. Although my education background is in engineering, I learned all my retail prowess from my father, who was also a business owner and watch lover. Long Island Watch features watches that enthusiasts like you enjoy from a wide variety of brands. Throw in fair pricing and the worry-free ownership that we provide, and you'll see why we have remained a reliable source for watches in the industry. My staff and I have decades of watch knowledge that you will be hard-pressed to find anywhere else. We are enthusiasts first and treat you how you want to be treated. We've got the most desirable models from the big players, such as Seiko, Citizen, and Bulova. But you know the real value lies in the more esoteric brands, such as Marathon, Formex, Islander, Phoebus, Laco, Damasco, and others. So keep in touch until you are ready to get your next timepiece. Could be tomorrow, could be next week. Our best deals are found in our members-only newsletter that you can sign up for today at LongIslandWatch.com. Thanks for listening.
Does your business model work if you still have to spend a significant amount of money in marketing? And if not, what do you think needs to change so that the economics work out?
Yeah, so, when we started, I would say probably for the first 10 to 15 years, once I started ramping up and actually running a business, what my accountant would call a business rather than a hobby, we spent a ton on marketing, a ton on paid traffic, we'll call it paid traffic, right, to get the people in the door. And after enough of that, we were finally able to dial that back and let the organics take over. And that's where I still am today. Of course, I have a decent sized advertising budget. Sometimes when I think about it, it's insane. But it's not on a percentage level. It's nothing compared to what it used to be. Now, I know other watch companies that are similar to mine who are still spending the old amounts, and it's, in their words, non-sustainable. They simply cannot keep doing it. They can't, I know people that are paying 30%, 35% the revenue of each item for acquisition of the customer. I mean, that's insane. By the time you do cost of goods sold and everything else, you're lucky to be, even turning a profit. So if that was traditional, I don't think I don't think it wouldn't be a sustainable business. Also, put this way, I wouldn't have, so many people on payroll and everything else that I've got going on. I would say though that, some of the things or some of the choices I've made over the years, like starting a YouTube channel, probably the most important decision I ever made. I didn't realize it at the time. Definitely my most valuable social asset is the channel. I didn't start Instagram until years after that. And that does well, also. But without these social assets, I certainly don't think I would be where I am today.
So now, faced with the marketplace that is in front of you and with some of the challenges that may be coming and sort of what you see, how are you revising your marketing strategy? You mentioned a little bit these YouTube videos and things like that, but you're very enterprising and you're very clever. I'm just curious what you see as being the interesting strategies to develop those relationships with consumers in ways where you may not have to pay directly for each of those relationships.
Right. That's a really good question. And a lot of the marketing geniuses, I have a CMO and he is the genius with the dollars and the spending of them and where to allocate them. Honestly, I'll say we try a lot of different things. We'll invest a little bit in different things here and there, and we'll kind of see what sticks, but I don't want to bury the lead because I don't know if you're going to get there eventually, but launching my own brand was probably the single most important thing I've ever done in the company in 20 years, because by launching my own brand of watches, accessories, etc., I have made the store sole source for an item. Now, all I have to do is create a demand for that item, which, don't forget, I already had 15 to 17 years of customers under my belt, create demand for that item. And if the people want that item, they only have one place to buy it from. That's me. And that is the sustainability that I'm looking for. And that will definitely, that's what keeps the company going now. It's what will keep it going in the future. I like to say, come into the store, shop for a Citizen, shop for a Seiko, but leave with an Islander, because that's really the end goal for me. Just because of obviously all the, I said before, DTC, when you're going from basically from the manufacturer direct to the consumer, there's so much more, margin, in there rather than buying from the wholesaler and going to the consumer. But that's definitely what I consider now to be the most important thing. Whether it be from the marketing aspect or from any other aspect in generating consumer value, building consumer lifetime value, stuff like that, all those metrics.
So let me sort of translate this to the core idea. You're saying that all the permutations, all the different types of ideas you have, it all boils down to needing to have more margin control, because you're going to have to spend money to marketing. And the only way that you can ensure that makes sense for you is if it's a product that no one else but you sells or controls the cost of.
Basically back to the beginning of this whole business where I got watches that no one else sold. Now, I couldn't control the cost of it, but I was pretty much sole source. You ask anybody, would they rather, just using round numbers, would they rather buy a watch for 50 and sell for 100 or buy a watch for 25 and sell for 100? I mean, no one's going to tell you, the former. Everyone's going to want the latter. And that I like to say that, I have staff that packs and ships full time. For them to pack and ship a Seiko is the same time for them to pack and ship an Islander. So that overhead is fixed. I would rather make more money and have them ship the Islander.
Now, let me point out the fact, and I want to talk about your watch Islander, but now you have Island Watch, which is a website that sells both Islander watches and continues to be the store to sell all these other things. Yeah. You haven't gone completely over. You still carry a bunch of brands. You just also have your own. Yeah. Why was it more, and then maybe it's because you're very risk averse, but why are you now, maybe you just have the time, being both a brand person and still running a store? Why not one or the other?
Because I'm realistic. I know that not everybody's going to want an Islander. They should, but not everyone's going to want one. And as I said before, Islanders, well, they'll get people in the store now, but they won't get, you ask 10 people on the street, have you ever heard of an Islander? I would be surprised if one person said yes. You ever hear of Citizen? 9 of them are going to say yes, maybe even 10. But no, I like being, watches are part of my life. I love watches. I have a watch chest that holds 250 watches. The store carries now about 3 dozen brands. I love watches, and I want to always carry them. It just so happened that, the brand never became splintered off into its own company. It's kind of one in the same, I guess, of the website itself. That's whether that was a mistake or not. When I started the brand 4 years ago, was something that probably won't manifest itself for a long time as far as from a financial and business aspect. But no, I wouldn't want to live solely on my own brand, because variety is certainly the spice of life. And for me to think that Islander can cater to my entire customer base, it can't and it won't. Even though there's over 200 SKUs right now in the lineup, definitely the other 3,000 or 4,000 watches that I carry from the other brands will, keep people shopping in the store.
When did you launch Islander?
September 2019.
Okay, so wow, okay, great timing.
Actually it was. It actually was.
And okay, so that's good to know. I mean, I'm looking at the watches right now, and knowing what I know about brand entrepreneurs and you as being a risk-averse person, I'm guessing that it's not going to be until 7, 8, 9, maybe even 10 years into running it, where we start to see Marc coming out as the artist, as the designer, as someone who is really trying to do something fresh. Right now, what I see is like the best of what you like. Like when I see this, I'm like, I know the watches this guy likes, But
Yeah.
you
I
know what I
make
mean?
no bones about it. I started the business when I found out that Seiko was discontinuing the SKX 007, 009, whatever. And
But you're like,
that
people still
was
want those.
people still want them. Well, people want them. I was selling a few thousand of them a year. And I was like, oh my goodness, there's going to be a major shortfall in revenue if I don't do something about this. And people have been arguing for years over, why doesn't the SKX have sapphire and blah, 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 blah. And then I was in a meeting in Basel and I did get a sneak peek at the 5KX that was the successor to the SKX. And I looked at it and I'm like, oh my goodness, it doesn't have mineral crystal. It's a push-pull crown. They lowered the water resistance to 100 meters. I'm like, the diehard community is going to have a hissy fit.
Yeah.
And so I knew immediately that I could come up with something that was quote unquote better than the SKX. Of course, no brand heritage, which some people bother, some people doesn't bother others. And that's where that was born. And, easily the first, I don't even know the number, 20 or 30 SKUs were all based off of Seiko models, Turtles, 013s, 007s, Samurais. And then we started to get some of our own DNA. There's certainly designs that look nothing like other pieces out there. And now there's a guy that works for me, Ryan, who does a majority of the designs, like the Northport, the Sands Point, and all this other stuff that's really maybe Seiko-esque, but definitely has its own design flair. And we keep progressing. But hey, I'll tell you, the Seiko stuff sells, so I'd be a fool not to continue to do it.
So in a great legacy of sort of mercantilism, one of the things that you do so well is you identify a need and you say, I'm going to try to satisfy that need with basically the best price possible. And that is a sort of time-honored tradition into being a merchant. And that is your strategy now. And maybe eventually you will go into the steps of, I'm not just responding to demand, but I'm creating some demand. But I guess the question is, to maintain and continue with this theme, which is I'm learning about demand and trying to respond to it, where do you continue to do your market research? It was you originally that would be on the forums, and as a member of the enthusiast community, you could identify these things. But as time goes on, as you age and new generations go in,
I'll say, probably, a majority of my job still, and people are shocked when they see that an email is answered by me. I still answer probably 70 to 75% of the emails, and it's hundreds a day. And that is honestly, quote unquote, market research.
Right.
Just listening to people, what they say, what they're unhappy about, or what they want to do with something. I like this, but it needs to have that. So we get info from there. And of course, just from seeing other brands' releases and how consumers react to them, that helps us shape where we're going. And then, quite honestly, and this is probably something that you shouldn't do, but a lot of times we just make things that we like. And that doesn't always work because what we like is not what other people like, as we've learned with a few of the releases that have flopped. But, invariably, sometimes we get a bellwether that just kind of rides off into the sunset. But yeah, it's an elusive goal, and it's always moving. But that's part of the fun, I guess, is chasing that goal.
The brands you carry, shifting focus, not to Islander, but the brands, you have a lot of brands that I would gladly wear. Some I don't recognize, but these are mostly solid brands. If you know watches, you're like, okay, this is not just a bunch of silly watches. These are this is serious watches. Again, really, really no focus on what I'll call like branding. This is these are cool watches from often little companies, very utility based. But my question is, what do the brands themselves want out of you? They have some choices in who they can work with. I'm sure they say, hey, Marc, it would be great if you could do this, great if you do that. What are they asking of you?
I could... I gotta be nice. I think people are surprised when they hear that a lot of the bigger brands, which I can only get now, obviously, because I'm a bigger store and carry more weight, that watches to a lot of these bigger brands are just they're commoditized, they're commodities. It's nothing but a SKU to the salesman. And to the point where the salesman doesn't even understand maybe knows what an automatic movement is, but doesn't know a 4R36 from a 6R35 and what the inherent differences is and stuff like that. So what do the brands want from me? I don't think anything. I don't believe that I am even a blip on their radar. There are much larger bloggers, and I'm sure you know who they are, that I think they pay much more attention to. But it's not me. I just think from me, they just want to check on time, and to portray their products in a good light. If I ever did an expose on the inner workings of the biggest watch brands, it would be a hilarious book, because it's absolutely crazy, the stuff that I deal with on a fairly frequent basis. And it's not only me. I talk to other decent-sized players in the field, and they're like, yeah, Marc, it's not just you. It's us too. They're doing that to us also. And, I look at it like, if someone came to you and said, Ariel, you've got this model, ABC123. I bought 6 last week. I sold all 6. I want to buy 20 this week. Would you ever say, yeah, I can't sell you 20? I just can't. I'll give you 4 this time. I don't understand.
They don't let you grow is your complaint.
No, they don't. And not only they don't let you, I guess what they do just doesn't make sense to me half the time. As an entrepreneur, as the owner of the business, it doesn't make sense to me. They play these little games in the background, and I don't get it.
It's so I don't disagree in my own sense. I do business with the brands very differently, but I guess
yes.
What Marc is saying is that mostly foreign-owned watchmakers do business in what we feel as Americans is a non-straightforward way. They don't necessarily say what they mean. They don't necessarily ask for what they want. You have to spend a lot of time with the relationship, talking to them carefully to understand what even makes sense. Watch brands often will want things that appear to be very detrimental for either their short or long-term goals. There always seems to be some type of trade-off. As an American with sometimes a very practical mindset, we see what often appears to be a lack of strategy, a lack of commitment, a lack of consistency, and their priorities seem maybe strange by our measure. But I would say
a lot of times as Americans, we are global. We're looking for, I've got the word I generally use, but, we're looking to be the best, if let's grow this thing and let's do the best we can. Whereas it actually is American companies also that are doing this to me, but I'll go back to, some of the foreign European companies. World domination, that's what I'm looking for. They don't want world domination. They're just happy selling their watches, however many they make a year, 2,000, and that's it. They have no aspirations to sell 10,000 a year.
There's another side to it that I have to see all sides. I have to be friends with everyone, and I make it my job to be sort of an academic. But I'll tell you a side that I've seen and that we take for granted as Americans. We grew up in a place of relatively high business ethics, a rule of law, a court system that exists to help resolve disputes, pretty clear use of lawyers, contracts, and established best practices. A lot of these people come from places where that is not necessarily the case or as strong, and therefore they believe that we're there to cheat them. Maybe they're there to cheat us, but I guess they don't recognize is we're willing to grow a business with a foreign company who we may not actually see on a regular basis because we're committed to a mutually beneficial sort of transparent relationship where things are made clear, and if it doesn't work out, you stop. They are always thinking that someone's going to try to deceive them, use them, exploit them. Maybe they've done that to others. And so they oftentimes don't assume that an arm's length distance relationship of mutual respect and transparency is even possible or what people want. And for me, that's really the big difference. Because Americans, they're like, we seem like kids to them. They're like, hey, we're going to do business. This is going to be great. And they're like, you guys are so naive. And I think it's not we're naive. We just don't come into it thinking, how can we exploit them?
Right. And that's definitely true. But, and then there's some brands I'll deal with, and the model, they'll have a model that is just it's a runaway. Every time they make it, it sells out. Well, instead of making 50 next time, make 100, make 200. If it keeps selling out every time, make more. The worst thing you could do is not have something the customer wants. The FOMO only lasts so long, and then no one wants it anymore. But no, I get it. Definitely a different culture sense. Definitely
hold on, Mark.
a different way of doing business. Yep.
Maybe not in your little sort of neck of the woods, but you have to agree that this watch industry is guilty of overproduction constantly. So you're saying that they don't make a lot, but at the same time, it's in the larger context if they make too much.
Yeah, but that's, I would say that's not the companies I deal with.
Not the companies do it, but again, the context.
Right. Correct. Yes, you're totally correct. Yes, because, and in case people don't know, the manufacturer, they have to constantly annualize numbers, right? And, last year we made 30,000 watches. This year we got to make 40,000. And they make 40,000 and they push them out to distributors. And distributors are forced to buy them. And the distributors at the end of the year are sitting on 15,000 watches that haven't sold in 12 months. And that's when the whole gray market develops. And I fully get that.
And the problem is that, in a sense, you can't avoid it, but you're dealing with a factory. And the only thing a factory wants to do is keep making more of whatever that factory makes. They don't care about anything else. They're just like, we can still operate as a factory, right? And so the watch industry demand waxes and wanes, even though interest in watches remains high. But as far as the factories are concerned, people got to buy brand newly made watches all the time.
Right. Yes, constant demand.
And that is actually one of the weaknesses with, I think, the Japanese companies, because their entire ability to charge as little as they do is based upon a certain large, high volume of production, which, again, totally makes sense. But within the context, I think Seiko has been especially exposed to this, is they've really tried to increase their rates because they've reduced production, and they've seen a lot of pushback. The community isn't like, we don't like Seiko enough to pay whatever for your watches. Like, you were cool and exciting because it was a lot of watch for the money. At 3, 4, 5 times the price of what I was used to spending, I'll go buy something else.
Right. I get that. Yeah, you're right. No, there's definitely more sides to the coin, especially from the manufacturer standpoint, versus, either the vendor standpoint, even the customer standpoint. The customer honestly doesn't care. They usually buying on price approximately. That's how they make a brand decision.
Does it surprise you now in 2023 how popular watches are? And has your business benefited from the sort of overall uptick in watch interest in the mainstream?
Yeah, it's one of those things. I'm like, wow, will this business be handed down to my kids? And I wouldn't want them to do it, but I don't know where it'll be, where the wristwatch business will be in 10, 15 years. But I do feel that the Apple Watch, smartwatch craze certainly has helped the old, rising tide, whatever it is, floats all boats or whatever. I do feel that is certainly helping the industry as a whole, because if you can get a watch on the wrist of a 16-year-old or a 15-year-old, maybe one day when they get a job, they'll want something on their wrist that tells time, that won't constantly be beeping and buzzing and telling them their heart rate. We have to get watches on kids' wrists so that there actually is some sort of an industry over the next few years. I know when the Apple Watch came out, a lot of people said this was the end, and I don't think so. Just like the Moonswatch, man, that was probably one of the best things to happen to the wristwatch industry in, I don't know, since the quartz crisis, I guess, in booming popularity. It got people talking about watches again. And I don't care if you bought one of those. That's great. If you weren't a watch guy and now you're a watch guy or gal, and you're going to now, start building a collection based on something that, Swatch X Omega did. Excellent. I have nothing wrong with that. I hope the industry continues to grow, but I can't say that it will. I don't know where it's going. Who the hell knows what technology will supplant it next.
Is there merit to selling smartwatches alongside what you sell on Long Island Watch?
Not for me personally. I don't sell any smartwatches, whether by design or whatever. I've been approached by 1 or 2 makers of smartwatches to carry them. And it's not where I live personally. I own one kind of smartwatch. It's a Garmin running watch, but that's it. 80% of what I carry is mechanical automatic, and that's kind of the foundation of my business. That's how I started, and that's the way I want to keep going. I don't want to go into that whole tech thing because I feel that if you want a smartwatch, there's places to buy a smartwatch. I can compete much better on the mechanical automatic affordable market. That's exactly where I live.
So I think what you're saying, of course, makes sense because it reflects your own interest and where your own passion and, of course, experience lays. But I think that maybe not yet, but in a couple of years, especially as there's a little bit more of a what I call it the generic smartwatch market, where it isn't just the name brands.
Sure.
But if kids are shopping for smartwatches and they see that in the same store traditional watches are there, it seems to me a very logical way to get them introduced to both, right? Because
absolutely.
The question still remains tomorrow: how are we going to get people into watches? You've already shared that it's expensive to do and hard. Of course, blog to watch is one way of doing it, but we speak to a certain slice of the consumer community. We're not obviously going to speak to everyone all the time. Businesses like Long Island Watch and entrepreneurs like Marc benefit from there being an enthusiast community. You can sell against the enthusiast community, but what you've said, which I agree, is making your own enthusiast community and making your own enthusiasts is hard. Hopefully, you leave it to the professionals like me. But you service them, but there needs to be watch nerds, we'll call them that, out there for you to do business with in the first place. And that's a necessary species of consumer for your business model to continue. Do you agree, disagree?
Oh, I fully agree. 100%. I mean, you said it perfectly. And if, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, smartwatches are a little more, I guess, I can't say ubiquitous. They're ubiquitous now. I mean, I'm sure you wrist spot all the time when you're traveling or whatever.
Oh, yeah, just like you.
And I would say, what do you think the smartwatch percentage is on people's wrists? 60, 70%? I mean, it's kind of insane.
It's impressively high. Look, it was about a decade ago where I wrote an article in the blog to watch that said smartwatches are going to be the highway to high-end watches, and so I'm so happy that you validated that. But I also understood from the moment that the Apple Watch originally came out, I think it was like 2014 or something like that, that this was going to take over all the empty wrists. If there was an empty wrist out there, it was going to have a smartwatch sooner or later, and it's happened fast.
Yes, it did. It went. I would say 0 to 60 in no time at all.
And the funny thing is, you were there too. The watch industry couldn't have been more dismissive or misunderstanding for the first year or two. I mean, they had just no idea what was going on.
Well, this is the same, but don't forget though, dude, this is the same industry that said internet will never survive for watches. This whole e-com thing, people will never buy a $300 watch online. They're going to want to walk into a store. And, these dinosaurs couldn't get it more wrong. Absolutely.
I totally agree. Marc, we're basically out of time. We'll have to do this again, but just tell people where they can learn more about you or check out more stuff from you on the internet. What's the website, any social media presence?
I appreciate that. So it's longislandwatch.com, YouTube channel as well. I think it's like @IslandWatch or, and on Instagram, there's Long Island Watch and there's Islander Watch, which is dedicated just to the Islander Watch brand.
This has been the Superlative Podcast with Marc Frankel, founder of Long Island Watch. Marc, thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Superlative Podcast. This show relies on support from you, the audience. Please subscribe, review, and share Superlative with your friends. To get the latest watch news and enthusiast commentary, also listen to the Blog to Watch Weekly podcast. For show ideas, comments, or business, please contact us at podcasts@ablogtowatch.com.